Thank you, Ryan, for the introduction, also for what you're doing to further the cause on our campus and also nationally. And we're very proud of our veterans and the role that they're playing on our campus and beyond. It's a real honor to join you for this third annual Student Veterans of America National Conference. And I'm impressed to hear that at this conference you had representation from 79 chapters and coming from 33 states. So that's terrific. Clearly, this is a movement that's building and growing, and I think having a real impact for the good really across the country. And I think your efforts are helping your fellow student veterans succeed. And I'd like especially to acknowledge George Washington Student Veterans of America chapter. That's our chapter among the larger organization, and represented by Andy Harris and other members. For all of you, I want to say how grateful we are, and by we I mean all of us in America, are for your service to our nation. You've risked all for the common good, and America's colleges and universities, in my opinion, have a responsibility to respond in a very forthright and active way to reach out to help you become integrated into college and university life, which is a very different world from what you experienced during your time of the service, and to not only to do that for the benefit of individual veterans, but for the benefit of our own campuses. One thing I want to talk about is how important I think it is to our university campuses to have a robust presence of student veterans because of what you contribute to enrich the life of your fellow students on campus, as well as everything you're doing to continue the mission here at home as you develop and enter into your careers. That's another way in which you're going to continue to contribute to our country's future. And that our country does require, we all know this, a highly trained, highly skilled workforce. For us to be competitive, we have to draw on all the skills and talents that we have in this country. And the leadership skills and the habits of teamwork and the discipline and the rigor that you develop during your time in the service, I think makes you ideal contributors to the strengthening of the American economy, American society, and making us competitive, and that way continuing the mission that you were already part of when you were serving in the military. So through the pursuit of a college degree, you really are helping to secure our national future. As I said, colleges and universities benefit from your presence, and there are several ways in which this happens. You have proven capacity to lead and inspire others, and you've acquired that and tested that capacity, often in situations of extreme complexity and often in cases of dire emergency. Your experience, I believe, enriches the classroom and campus environments and enriches the education of your fellow students because you bring a perspective, a unique perspective to them that they're not going to have acquired if they simply come straight from high school into their college or university. And your commitment to service, which you've also demonstrated in such an extraordinary way, is an inspiration to students, and I think strengthens their own and inspires their own commitment to service. And at George Washington, we've learned firsthand what student veterans can and do bring to our university with the active engagement we've had with our Student Veterans of America chapter. And we've seen the chapter grow as the number of veterans entering our university has grown pretty dramatically. Right now we have more than 500 student veterans enrolled this fall. That's up from 415 just last year. And more than 266 of those student veterans are receiving Yellow Ribbon program benefits this fall. That's up from 161 last year. So from 161 to 266, a two-thirds increase just in 1 year. And of course, that represents, and this is one of the things that if you're talking to your university administrations, this is one of the things that you're going to need to explain because that is a pretty substantial financial commitment, as you know. It's a matching program with the Veterans Affairs Department, and we were one of the early institutions to get involved in this. I think in this region, we were among the first to say we were going to dedicate substantial resources in student aid to match the federal contribution to support students under the Yellow Ribbon program, a key component of the new GI Bill. And we have done that, but it's something that requires an ongoing commitment because, of course, when we recruit students, to begin with, we then have to support them for the whole time they're here. And by the way, our university is a little bit unusual. We have what we call a no-surprise tuition policy, which means that students starting our university never have a tuition increase after their first year. They're locked in for up to 5 years when they come into our undergraduate program, and their student aid stays at that level as well. So when we make a commitment to a student, that's a long-term commitment to the success of that student. And so we had to, in a way, you'll find that university administration is going to have to swallow hard and realize that this is not going to be without cost. But I believe that the benefits to their campus and the way in which they're discharging their responsibility to the nation by stepping up to support veterans really is consistent with their mission and is something that they ought to be doing. So, and we've embraced that. We've embraced that mission and that responsibility. Our student veterans have played a direct role in helping to enrich the culture of service that's a tradition at our university. We're a university that started with a vision of the nation's founder. George Washington actually had an explicit statement in his last will and testament that he wanted there to be a university in the nation's capital that would bring together citizens from the 13 colonies, the 4 colonies at the time, and bring them together where they would live together, learn from each other, form lasting friendships, and become citizen leaders for the new democracy. So we've had this strong culture of service. That's one of the reasons we've been so committed to veterans going way back in our history. But it's also, I think, something to which veterans right now, our student veterans, are directly contributing. We saw this just last September 11th, just 2 weeks ago. We had our second freshman day of service. We had about 2,000 students fanned out across all 8 wards in the District of Columbia, and they went to their some of the surrounding areas as well. And our freshman students, so a number of the sites we went to, our freshman students were led by student veterans, including some of the older student veterans who weren't necessarily freshmen. And one of those groups went to Vincent Hall, a veterans retirement home just outside the district. And there they were joined by the First Lady, Michelle Obama, who helped some of our students work on that facility. So it was a great symbol of something that goes on all the time, and that is the leadership that our student veterans are providing to the rest of our students in strengthening and deepening the culture of service that's a hallmark of our university, as it is of so many of your institutions as well. We count veterans among our most distinguished alumni. You may be interested to know that the very first returning GI to be supported by the original GI Bill was a student at George Washington named Don Balfour. So he was the first GI Bill recipient. Our other alumni include Colin Powell, Admiral Thad Allen, the Coast Guard Commandant retired, who you probably saw him. He was on television and radio a fair amount in the last few months because he was the incident commander for the Deep Horizon oil spill in the Gulf. He happens to be one of our alumni, and we honored him just last week by conferring on him our second Colin Powell Public Service Award. And I'd also mention someone who may be familiar to you, Tammy Duckworth, who was an assistant administrator or assistant secretary rather, at the VA, and a wounded combat pilot, veteran, wounded in Iraq, who we gave the first of our Colin Powell Awards to last year. And I had the honor, it really was an honor, of serving with her on a panel along with Senator Mark Warner, the junior senator from Virginia, one of our alumni as well, at a panel this past June in New York City that was talking about veterans affairs to a national conference on public service. So I just mentioned that because we're very proud of our connection with veterans, and I think all of your institutions can point to veterans who have gone on to do great things for your institutions, and I think that's something you can point out and you can take as a case to your administrations when you're making a case for their stepping up to support veterans. And I think that you will find that this is something that can be done. You can develop the same level of engagement on your campuses if you are ready to be advocates for your fellow student veterans, and if you can establish the kind of dialogue that Brian was talking about, that he exemplified with your institution's leadership about what you need to be successful. And it may take a while for that dialogue to become established. I think Brian said something which is really true. Every university president and every university dean of students faces a lot of issues. There are a lot of irons in the fire at university all the time. They're very, very complicated organizations. There are always demands on your time, and always things are pulling you in different directions. And the reality is, to get anything heard in the university, you've got to make a certain amount of noise to do that. You've got to have somebody who's willing to step up and really knock on those doors, not once, never take no for an answer. You got to stick with it. I asked Brian before I came in here if there were any other university presidents here. I didn't want to annoy them by giving you this kind of advice in their presence, but I don't think there are any right now. So, so I can tell you that, you know, it really is the squeaky wheel that gets the oil. I'm afraid that's true in all organizations, but especially in complex organizations like universities. So if you want to get something done, you really do have to be persistent, and it's good to have somebody like Brian and his fellow students who are willing to go through those steps and knock on those doors and don't take no for an answer. And you'll eventually get through, because I think you have a strong case to make, and I think if you stick with it, you will succeed. You have to start the dialogue by educating your institution's leadership about the unique needs and challenges faced by student veterans, something that they're not likely to be thinking about before you point this out to them. They're not likely to think about the significance of the difference between student veterans and traditional aged students, especially in the first year of a college experience. They're not likely to think that much about the difference between military and campus environments and what it means to bridge the gap and what's involved in bridging the gap between those two kinds of environments. They're not likely to be aware of the challenges of the admissions process. For example, when prospective students are still serving and they're filling out their applications abroad, often in difficult circumstances, they're not necessarily aware of the challenges that entails. They're not necessarily aware of the complexity of calculating credit hours from military training, and they need special expertise to do that. They may not be aware of the effects of some of the effects of service, like traumatic brain injury. By the way, there's a front page article in this morning's Washington Post, top above the fold, on traumatic brain injury that I refer to. I know this is something that's being discussed in Congress and elsewhere right now, and also post-traumatic stress disorder. They're not necessarily thinking about the effects that this can have on a student who's trying to integrate himself or herself into an academic environment. So these are all things that they need to be aware of. And they're also not aware of just some of the logistical issues, like the lag time between when bills have to be paid and when federal benefits arrive. You know, there often is that lag, and you sometimes need to find ways of bridging that difference in time. And we've done that by providing what are in effect bridge loans for veterans, so that if they've got to pay their housing bill when they first arrive, they have the ability to do that even before the check arrives from their veterans' benefits. And I think that's, again, something that you need to have a little bit of experience and expertise to be sensitive to. So just a few suggestions about what your institutions can do based on how we've responded at George Washington. I think it's critically important to have full-time staff. First of all, to have dedicated staff in admissions offices who are aware of the kinds of challenges I was just describing and know how to negotiate the terrain. It's also important, I think, to have an office that provides ongoing student veteran services. And so we actually have created an office, the Student Veterans Office, and we have a full-time coordinator who's with us. And I want to point her out to you, because if you have questions about the details of what we're doing in that office, she really is the person to talk to. So I wonder if Mary Waring, which if you just raise your hand there, Mary Waring, who is our outreach coordinator of our Student Veterans Office, and her graduate apprentice sitting next to her there, Samantha Bashaw. So if you could talk to either Mary or Sam there, they can fill you in on the details of what their office actually does, and that might be useful for you to take back to your institutions, because I think one of the first things a president's likely to ask, if you go to a university or college president and say you'd like to start a new initiative, the first question that occurs to all of us is, who else is doing this and how are they doing it? You know, what can we learn from other institutions so we don't have to invent the wheel, and so we're not out there doing something on our own that's already been tried elsewhere and hasn't succeeded. So that's one of the first questions to ask, and I think you'll find that they can give you some first-hand information that might be very useful to you. I also think it's important to have a dedicated student veterans orientation program, because of the issues I mentioned earlier. It's very different coming from high school, directly from high school to college. And you know, veterans don't need to be told what it's like going from high school to college. What they want to know is what it's like going from military service
to college or university. And that's a different set of questions and a different set of answers. And so to have a dedicated orientation program for students when they first arrive is, I believe, very important. I also think it's important to have a campus-wide advisory committee that can coordinate student services across the various schools and departments. Sorry? Try that. Is that coming from, you're hearing a buzz or feedback, or what are you hearing? Well, let me power through this then, because you can hear me? Okay. Great. So the advisory committee, I think, is important because if you're a university or college, anything like ours, you've got multiple programs, and some of them are going to have more knowledge about veterans issues than others. So to have a way of kind of equalizing that across the institution with a campus-wide advisory committee that represents all the parts of the institution, I think, can be very helpful. And above all, I think it's critical to listen, to have a mechanism for getting feedback from student veterans, so that you're not just aiming in the dark. You actually know what you're dealing with, and you're making sure that the services you're providing are accomplishing the mission that they're designed to accomplish. And so it's important to have a constant feedback mechanism that engages veteran students. There are other resources, checklists, news updates, and links to relevant resources can be posted online. We have a website that does that, and I think that's very useful. So these are just a few suggestions. In closing, let me say that it's important when you talk to university administrators to be specific about the needs, to be prepared with information about what other institutions are doing, to be persistent in establishing that ongoing dialogue. Don't take no for an answer. Remind your institution's leadership why they should be engaged with you, because it's the right thing to do. It's the right response to your service, to our nation, and because you provide a benefit to them they can't get from anyone else. You enrich the educational experience for all students with the unique perspective that you bring. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to address you this morning, and thank you once again for your service to our nation. I'd be happy to take a few questions. Thank you very much.